What's the sweetest revenge that has happened at your workplace? So we had a true Karen at work. Her name really was Karen, and she lived up to it. She took it upon herself to police all of the other employees in a cubicle and office setting. Heaven forbid that someone use the printer without using double-sided print or printing something for personal use. She was called the Printer Nazi. That nickname wasn't an exaggeration. Karen acted like the guardian of every single company policy, even the ones that didn't exist. She patrolled the office like she owned it, leaning over cubicles to watch people's screens, commenting if someone took a lunch that was too long, or reminding us that the coffee machine was for official use only. She wasn't a manager, not even a team lead, just a regular employee with too much time on her hands and an ego that needed constant feeding. And she had a talent for making every little thing feel like a federal crime. At first, most of us tried to laugh it off. It was easier than arguing with her. If she scolded you for printing a single-page recipe on the office printer, you'd just nod and let her walk away. If she reminded you that you were 2 minutes late coming back from lunch, you'd mumble something about traffic and avoid eye contact. But over time, the irritation built. Her helpful reminders turned into lectures, and her self-appointed role as the office police made even the simplest tasks feel like walking through a minefield. What made it worse was that Karen was untouchable, or so she thought. She had her own office, unlike most of us who worked in cubicles. That gave her privacy and the illusion of authority. She strutted through the open office like she was inspecting troops, but then she'd retreat to her private little space and shut the door behind her. None of us ever knew what she did in there, but we all assumed she was just emailing management about someone's unacceptable behavior. Our company had two buildings: the corporate office, where upper management and most of IT worked, and the production office, where I and most of my team were based. Occasionally, people from corporate would come over and use the empty cubicles if they needed to work on site for a day or two, and sometimes we'd go over there for meetings. It was a normal arrangement, except Karen hated it. She didn't like strangers in her domain, even if they were coworkers. She'd hover behind them, making sure they followed her imaginary rulebook. One week, IT came over to our building for a systems upgrade. There were 4 of them, including a quiet, middle-aged man I knew pretty well. He was the head of IT, a guy with decades of experience, respected by everyone from interns to executives. But Karen didn't know that. All she saw was a man she didn't recognize sitting in a cubicle, typing on a computer that wasn't his. I was grabbing a coffee when it happened. The head of IT was checking the weather on the company intranet. It was allowed, not just allowed, but encouraged, because we had major storms forecast that week and management wanted everyone to stay informed. Karen, of course, saw things differently. She marched right up behind him and, without even asking who he was, started lecturing him about misusing company resources. I wish I'd seen his face when she did it. Knowing him, he probably stayed calm and polite. That's just who he was. He didn't say a word about his title. He didn't flash his badge or pull rank. He just nodded and let her finish her little speech, all while probably fighting the urge to laugh in her face. A couple of hours later, during our break, he came over to me and told me what happened. "I just got scolded for checking the weather," he said, deadpan. "Apparently, I'm wasting company time." I nearly spat out my coffee. "Let me guess," I said. "Karen," he smirked. "Karen." I explained who she was, how she'd made herself the self-appointed office cop, how she hovered over people's shoulders, how she once tried to get someone written up for using a colored pen on a report. He laughed so hard he had to wipe his eyes. Then he got this thoughtful look and said, "You know, I think I might do something about that." At first, I thought he was joking. But when he walked back toward his temporary workstation with that slow, deliberate pace of someone with an idea forming, I knew Karen's reign of terror might finally be in trouble. What none of us knew then was that this harmless little incident, Karen lecturing the wrong person about checking the weather, would end up being the beginning of the end for her. The next day, when he showed up again, he had that same calm, almost amused expression on his face, the one he always wore when something interesting was about to happen. He walked past my cubicle, leaned in slightly, and said quietly, "I had a look at something last night." I raised an eyebrow. "At what?" "Karen," he said. "More specifically, Karen's browsing history." I nearly choked, trying not to laugh. "You didn't?" "Oh, I did," he replied, grinning now. "And you won't believe what I found." It turned out that our self-appointed office sheriff, the woman who had scolded the head of IT for checking the weather, the woman who lectured us all about misusing company resources, was one of the worst offenders in the building. She wasn't just checking social media during her lunch breaks or sneaking in a quick glance at the news. She was shopping every single day. And not just a few clicks here and there. She was spending hours scrolling through online stores, comparing prices, reading reviews, adding things to her cart, and placing orders, all during work hours, all on the company network. Handbags, shoes, kitchen gadgets, cosmetics, you name it. She even spent a solid 45 minutes browsing a luxury travel site on a Tuesday morning when she was supposed to be preparing reports. "She spends more time on Amazon than I do on actual work," he said, shaking his head. "It's unbelievable." The irony was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. The woman who had built her entire office identity around calling other people out for wasting company time had practically turned her office into an online shopping lounge. And it wasn't just a few visits. He showed me screenshots, timestamp after timestamp, page after page. It was a clear, documented pattern. Some days she spent over 3 hours online shopping. She had even been on a shopping site earlier that same day, right after scolding the head of IT for checking the weather. She had walked straight back to her office and ordered a blouse. I don't think I had ever laughed harder at work. The sheer hypocrisy of it was astounding. All those smug little lectures, all those passive-aggressive reminders about proper office conduct, and she was breaking the very rules she claimed to enforce. "Are you going to tell her?" I asked. He shook his head. Oh, no, I'm not saying a word to her, but I'm going to send this to HR. I remember just staring at him for a second, trying to decide if he was serious. But the twinkle in his eye told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't doing it out of spite. Well, not entirely. He was doing it because hypocrisy like that deserved consequences. Honestly, he added, leaning back in his chair, if she had just left me alone, I never would have looked. I wasn't planning to dig into anyone's browsing history, but she decided to make a scene, and now, he shrugged. Now she's going to answer for it. That afternoon, he drafted a neat, detailed report and sent it directly to HR. Every timestamp, every website, every session longer than 10 minutes. It was all there, laid out in black and white. And there was no arguing with the evidence. It was her login, her computer, her activity. For the next few days, things were strangely quiet. Karen was still strutting around the office like she owned the place, still peering over cubicle walls and sending passive-aggressive emails about printer settings. She had no idea that the ground beneath her was already starting to crack. But then little things started to happen. HR sent out a company-wide email reminding everyone about appropriate internet use during work hours. Then another one about how all network activity could be monitored. Then there was a meeting, just for managers, that ran unusually long. We all knew something was brewing. And then, about a week later, Karen didn't show up to work. No one said anything at first. People assumed she was sick or had taken a day off. But then a rumor started to spread, one that made everyone's coffee taste a little sweeter that morning. Someone had seen her in a closed-door meeting with HR the day before. Someone else had heard raised voices. And someone swore they had seen her storming out of the building, red-faced and furious. By lunchtime, the truth was out. Karen had been suspended pending an investigation into her misuse of company resources. The office felt different that afternoon. Lighter, quieter. It was as if the air itself had relaxed. People were talking in normal voices again, laughing a little louder. Someone even printed a meme on single-sided paper and taped it to the break room fridge. A printer joke, obviously. And though none of us said it out loud, we were all thinking the same thing. The mighty Karen had finally overstepped. When Karen finally came back 2 days later, something had changed. The smug, self-appointed office sheriff still strutted down the hallway, but there was a nervous edge to her now. She wasn't stopping by people's desks to remind them about the dress code or comment on how long they were at lunch. She wasn't hovering by the printer, counting how many sheets people used. She was quiet, too quiet. Rumor had it she'd spent those 2 days meeting with HR and upper management. They'd shown her the logs, the timestamps, the endless list of online shopping sessions. At first, she had tried to deny everything, claiming her account must have been hacked or that someone else had used her computer. But when they pulled up security footage showing her in her office during those exact times, she'd shifted tactics. She said it was research, and the head of IT told me later, laughing. She said she was analyzing consumer trends for a potential company project. We both knew that was complete nonsense. Karen's department had nothing to do with consumer data. She was grasping at straws and everyone knew it. But HR, being HR, had to go through the motions. They scheduled follow-up interviews, documented everything, and launched a formal investigation. Meanwhile, Karen was unraveling. She started sending long, dramatic emails to upper management about hostile work environments and witch hunts. She complained loudly to anyone who would listen about how unfair it all was. She even tried to throw other people under the bus, suggesting that everyone did a little personal browsing during work hours. So why was she being singled out? But the problem was, no one else was spending hours doing it every single day. No one else was abandoning their responsibilities to scroll through fashion blogs or add items to an online shopping cart. And no one else had built their entire office persona around enforcing the rules they themselves were breaking. The hypocrisy was too much for management to ignore, and honestly, too satisfying for the rest of us to watch. A few days later, Karen was called into another closed-door meeting. This one lasted over 2 hours. When she emerged, she looked pale and furious. She stormed back to her office, slammed the door, and didn't come out for the rest of the day. We all knew what that meant. The following morning, around 10 a.m., 2 HR reps and a security guard walked into her office. 10 minutes later, Karen walked out. Not strutting this time, but walking stiffly, silently, clutching a cardboard box with a few personal belongings. Her face was flushed, her eyes watery. She didn't look at anyone as she passed. It was over. The woman who had spent years making everyone's workdays miserable was gone in less than a week. The one who had lectured us endlessly about company policies had been undone by her own lack of discipline. And the poetic justice of it all wasn't lost on anyone. I remember glancing at the head of IT as she walked past. He didn't say a word, but the small, satisfied smile on his face said everything. After she left, the office erupted into something I hadn't seen in years. Relief. People were laughing again, joking around in the break room, actually enjoying being at work. It was like the tension that had hung over us for so long had finally lifted. Even the printer seemed to hum a little happier. A few weeks later, HR sent out a company-wide memo reminding everyone about appropriate internet use and warning that violations could result in disciplinary action, up to and including termination. No names were mentioned, of course, but everyone knew. As for Karen, we heard she tried to fight her termination. She claimed discrimination, harassment, even retaliation for whistleblowing, which was hilarious considering her so-called whistleblowing consisted of scolding the head of IT for checking the weather. None of it worked. The evidence was too overwhelming. She eventually dropped her threats of legal action and faded quietly into the background. Sometimes I think about how easily the whole thing could have been avoided. If she had just minded her own business, if she hadn't felt the need to humiliate and police everyone around her, no one would have ever looked at her browsing history. She would probably still be sitting in that office, clicking add to cart for hours every day while lecturing the rest of us about productivity. But she couldn't help herself. And in the end, her downfall wasn't caused by anyone else. It was entirely her own doing. There was a strange poetic justice in that. And the best part, the head of IT still jokes about that day whenever we talk. All she had to do was leave me alone, he says, shaking his head with a grin. But no, she had to try and play office cop. And look where that got her. Bye-bye, Karen. The first Monday without Karen felt almost surreal. People showed up to work with coffees in hand and actual smiles on their faces. No one was anxiously glancing over their shoulders to see if she was lurking around the corner, ready to pounce over some trivial thing. The break room chatter was louder, freer. Even the printer room, once her kingdom, felt strangely peaceful. It's funny how one person's energy can infect an entire workplace. Karen's presence had turned every minor task into a potential point of criticism. People were nervous to print out personal forms during lunch breaks, afraid to check the weather before their commute home, or even just laugh too loudly at a meme in a group chat. But now all of that anxiety seemed to melt away almost overnight. We didn't suddenly become lazy or start breaking rules left and right. Far from it. In fact, productivity went up. People were more willing to collaborate, more open to asking questions, and less likely to hide behind their cubicles. Without Karen constantly policing everyone, the office started to feel like a team again, instead of a classroom run by a self-appointed hall monitor. I remember about a week after she left, the head of IT came down again for a follow-up on some of the system upgrades. He stopped by my desk, leaned against the cubicle wall, and said with a smirk, "Feels lighter in here, doesn't it? Like we just had a toxic cloud sucked out of the building," I joked. He laughed. "You'd be surprised how often it's just one person causing 90% of the chaos. Karen isn't unique. Every office has one. But man, she made it into an art form, and he was right. Karen wasn't just annoying. She was a reminder of how quickly small, self-righteous behaviors can snowball into real toxicity. At first, it was little things, side comments about how many times someone got up from their desk, unsolicited reminders about company policy. But over time, those little things built up into a culture of fear and resentment. With her gone, even management seemed to loosen up. They started asking for feedback about how to improve office morale, something they hadn't done in years. New policies about transparency and workplace communication were introduced, ironically inspired by the situation with Karen. And when we got a new hire a few months later, one of the first things people told them was, "Welcome to the team. Oh, and don't worry, the office Karen is gone." The funniest part came a few months after Karen's departure. Someone found one of her old sticky notes stuck to the side of a filing cabinet. In big, bold letters, it read, "Proper printer use is everyone's responsibility." Someone taped it above the printer with a little doodle of a crown on top, and it became an ongoing joke. Whenever someone printed a few extra pages, they'd bow dramatically and say, "Forgive me, Your Majesty." It wasn't about mocking her. Okay, maybe it was a little, but more about reclaiming something that had been suffocating before. It turned a bitter memory into a running joke, a symbol of how much better things were now. Every once in a while, Karen's name would pop up in conversation. Rumors said she'd gotten another job at a smaller company nearby, but no one seemed to know how long she lasted there. A few people speculated that she probably tried the same behavior again and met the same fate. Others joked that maybe she'd finally learned her lesson. As for me, I mostly just felt relief. Watching someone who had made everyone's lives miserable for so long finally face the consequences of their own hypocrisy was deeply satisfying. But it was more than just revenge. It was a lesson. It taught me that people like Karen thrive on control and fear. They count on others staying silent, staying compliant, staying too afraid to push back. But the second someone shines a light on their behavior, even accidentally, like when she decided to scold the head of IT, their power crumbles. It also reminded me of something else. Karma doesn't always come fast, but it does come. Karen spent years lecturing everyone about rules, only to break them herself. She tried to embarrass someone for checking the weather, and that same person ended up being the one to uncover the truth about her own misuse of company resources. And in the end, it wasn't a dramatic showdown or a shouting match that ended her reign. It was a quiet, methodical process, a log file, a review, a simple, undeniable truth. Months later, when the new head of her old department asked me about the printer story, I couldn't help but smile. All she had to do, I said, echoing the head of IT's words, was mind her own business. But she didn't, and that's why she's gone. So yeah, if you're ever tempted to micromanage your coworkers, snoop over their shoulders, or play office cop, maybe think twice. Because if you're hiding skeletons of your own, chances are they'll eventually tumble right out of the closet. And when they do, well, bye-bye, Karen. Again. The weeks after Karen's exit felt like when a loud refrigerator finally dies, and you realize you've been shouting over the hum for years. Conversations filled the open floor again. People swapped tips without prefacing every sentence with, "Don't tell anyone I asked." Even small things changed. The plant lady started leaving cuttings on the window ledge, and someone brought in a tin of cookies with a note that just said, We survived Q3. It wasn't that Karen alone had killed morale, but removing her was like pulling a nail out of a tire. The slow leak finally stopped. Management did something smart for once. Instead of pretending nothing had happened, they leaned in. HR held short, no-nonsense sessions about what appropriate use actually meant, but the bigger shift was tone. They kept saying, "We trust adults to act like adults." And for once, it didn't sound like a threat. The head of IT came by during one of those sessions and, with a grin, said, "Checking the weather is still legal." Laughter broke the tension in a way no memo could. With the oxygen back, the work got better. We started shipping ahead of schedule. I watched people offer help without worrying someone would accuse them of slacking. The junior analyst who Karen used to haunt from behind suddenly started asking sharper questions in meetings. Her dashboard stopped trying to impress and started telling the truth. You could see confidence returning the way rain returns to a dry garden, first in a few patches, then everywhere at once. One afternoon, I caught myself doing something I hadn't in years, lingering by someone's desk to talk about an idea just because it excited me. No stopwatch, no fake urgency. The idea turned into a small project. The project turned into a pilot. The pilot saved a team 3 hours a week. It wasn't genius, it was air. And I realized how much we'd adapted to breathing shallow under scrutiny. There were echoes, of course. Culture doesn't flip like a switch. A couple of people who used to orbit Karen tried to keep the old vibe going. Tiny digs, just so you know emails, CCs that didn't belong. But it's hard to play hall monitor when no one salutes. Without her shade, they wilted. One of them even apologized to me in the break room, clumsy and earnest, and said, "I think I got too used to watching." I told him, "Same. Let's try working instead." We both laughed, and for once it didn't feel sharp. I'd have quietly rolled out a few changes too. Nothing punitive, more like guardrails. Idle timeouts that actually idled. A pop-up once a quarter reminding you the network is a workplace, not a mall. I didn't mind. Boundaries feel different when they're consistent. The head of IT and I traded a look the first time that pop-up appeared. He mouthed, "Weather's fine." I gave him a thumbs up. About a month in, we onboarded a new hire into Karen's old department. Her name was Maya. She didn't know the lore, and I didn't volunteer it. She set up her desk with 2 pens and a postcard of a mountain. By Friday, she'd already made friends with the folks in logistics, which was a minor miracle. On her second week, she asked if the printer could default to double-sided. "For trees," she said, apologetic. We made the change in 5 minutes. No lecture, no crown. She grinned like she'd just discovered a cheat code and went back to work. That was the point. The behavior itself had never been the villain. It was the performative policing around it. Sometimes late in the day, I'd pass Karen's old office and catch my reflection in the dark glass. The door stayed shut for a while, then facilities reassigned it as a focus room with a simple rule taped to the wall. Close the door when you need quiet. Open it when you're done. It felt like poetry, accidental but perfect. We reclaimed the space without naming the ghost. I won't lie and say I never thought about the moment that tipped everything. I did often. Not as a victory lap, but as a hinge. If Karen hadn't tried to discipline the one person in the building who could see the receipts, she might still be here, sipping coffee in that office and counting other people's pages. That's the thing about petty power. It forgets that real power is boring and thorough and keeps logs. There were tiny rituals that bloomed in the absence. Little ways we rewrote muscle memory. On Fridays, someone put up a whiteboard by the printer where people scribbled wins from the week. A shipment saved, a bug fixed, a rough conversation handled well. No one would have dared call attention to themselves like that before. Now we used it to notice each other. The head of IT added, "Server stayed up during the storm. You're welcome," and drew a smiley face with a lightning bolt. The junior analyst wrote, "Used my voice in a meeting." I circled it and wrote, "Do it again." The best sign that we were healing came on a rainy Tuesday. The power flickered once, twice. Back in the Karen days, that would have triggered whispered accusations. Who left a space heater on? Who overloaded a strip? Whose fault is this? Instead, someone called out, "Everyone saved?" And 20 voices answered, "Saved." I posted the weather link in the chat with a wink. We kept working. The crisis that never was passed like a cloud. And somehow that felt more profound than any grand gesture. I started leaving a few minutes early some days, not to escape, but because I knew nothing absurd would ambush the last 10 minutes. I stopped composing defensive emails in my head while brushing my teeth. I slept better. It's wild what your nervous system learns to expect and how long it takes to teach it new lessons. One evening, as we were packing up, Maya asked me, "Is it always this normal?" I said, "It is when we protect it." She nodded like that made sense. She didn't need the backstory. She was the backstory's purpose. If there was a single moment that told me we were ready for whatever came next, it was the day the head of IT swung by with a stack of old surge protectors and a tray of pastries. "Storm insurance," he joked, setting both down. He looked around at the hum, no patrolling, no flinching, and said, almost to himself, "This is what offices are supposed to sound like." Then he took a pastry, wiped sugar off his tie, and disappeared back into the wires. That night I walked to my car under a sky the color of wet slate and realized we were nearing the end of the story. Not because there was nothing left to fix, but because the fix had become daily and unremarkable. We had moved from surviving a person to maintaining a culture. The printer printed, the weather link linked, the door opened and closed on purpose. And somewhere past the parking lot lights, a lesson about attention and power and consequence settled into place the way a file saves, quietly, then forever. A few months later, life had settled into a kind of quiet competence. The story about Karen faded into one of those office myths you reference with a raised eyebrow and a half smile, mostly to remind yourself how far you've come. New deadlines replaced old dramas. We were busy in the best way. tired at the end of the day because we'd built something, not because we'd endured someone. The update arrived by accident. I was in line at a sandwich place near the corporate building, scrolling through emails when I looked up and saw her, Karen. Same haircut, same sensible shoes, a different badge clipped to a different blazer. She was with a man who seemed to be walking her through a checklist, pointing at the coffee station, the fire exit, the lobby sign-in, and onboarding by the look of it. I couldn't hear what they were saying, and I didn't try. It wasn't my business anymore. Still, I felt that old voltage arc across the distance. Memory has muscle. She glanced around the room as if taking inventory of potential violations, then caught herself, softened her posture, nodded once, twice. The tour moved on, and so did I. 2 days after that, a former coworker texted me a screenshot of a neighborhood forum post. Friendly reminder, please don't police your colleagues. If you have concerns, use the proper channels. No names, no details. But I could read the outline like a watermark. Maybe she tried to plant her flag again. Maybe someone pulled it up before it rooted. I didn't reply with a joke. I just sent a thumbs up and put my phone away. Whatever lessons she learned, or refused to, wasn't mine to grade. Back at our place, the rhythm held. Maya turned out to be quietly ferocious at process work. She fixed 3 small things that had been big annoyances for years and did it without a memo. The junior analyst led a meeting and didn't apologize after each sentence. The head of IT swapped an old switch and left a sticky note shaped like a lightning bolt. Weather's still legal. HR, for once, acted like a group of humans instead of a firewall. The whiteboard by the printer filled with modest triumphs. Trained the new guy, caught a decimal before it shipped, asked for help and got it. I started to think of the office as a body that had healed. Not miraculously, not overnight, but stitch by stitch. On a gray morning, facilities finally took the paper off the glass of Karen's old office, our focus room now, and mounted a small frame print on the wall. A simple landscape, 2 trees near a river, nothing grand. Under it, someone had taped a handwritten line, "Leave it better than you found it." I don't know who wrote it. It felt right. The kind of instruction that doesn't require an enforcer, only adults. We had our bumps. A new supervisor tried to reintroduce performance theater. Late night emails with red exclamation points. Quick syncs that were neither quick nor sinking. It lasted 2 weeks. People pushed back respectfully but firmly. And because the culture had shifted, the pushback didn't sound like mutiny. It sounded like standard. He adapted or moved on. Either way, the office didn't contort itself to fit his urgency. That, more than anything, told me the change wasn't a mood. It was infrastructure. One rainy afternoon, the head of IT swung by with a fresh batch of surge protectors like a door-to-door saint of uptime. We split a donut at my desk, and he asked, not unkindly, "Ever think about how that all started?" I shrugged. "A weather tab," he laughed. "Right, and a person who mistook proximity for authority." We fell quiet. Somewhere across the floor, the printer whirred to life, double-sided and unremarkable. He stood, straightened his tie, and said, "Logs don't lie." Then he winked and vanished back into the server room hum. That night, I walked the long way to the parking lot. The storm had rinsed the air clean, and the puddles made the lot look like a map of small inland seas. I caught my reflection in a shallow one. Tired face, a little older than I remembered, steady. I thought about all the devices in an office that buzz, blink, and whir without complaint. Printers, switches, people. How easily we confuse quiet competence with something that doesn't need care. How fast power curdles when it stops being accountable. People sometimes ask if I feel bad about how it ended for Karen. I don't feel good about it, if that's what they want to hear. I feel accurate. Consequences aren't cruelty, they're gravity. She built a world out of small humiliations and was eventually pinned by the weight of the rules she wielded. If there's pity in me, it's for the part of her that couldn't tell the difference between being respected and being feared. A year to the day after she left, someone brought in a cake with no inscription and set it in the break room. No speech, no candles. We cut slices between meetings, left the knife on a napkin, and got back to work. Later, I wrote on the whiteboard, "Kept it human." Someone drew a crown next to it, then crossed the crown out and replaced it with a smiley face wearing headphones. The joke landed the way good jokes do. Not mean, just precise. If there's a moral here, and I'm cautious about attaching morals to office stories, it's this. Culture is made out of the smallest behaviors you repeat on purpose. Close the door when you need quiet. Open it when you're done. Print double-sided because you care about trees, not because a stranger is counting. Check the weather when a storm rolls in. Say good morning like you mean it. Let people work. Let logs speak. And when someone mistakes micromanagement for meaning, don't argue with them forever. Build something sturdier around them, or, if you must, without them. On my way out that evening, I passed the focus room one last time. The light was off. The glass showed a faint reflection of the floor's overheads, like stars in a well. I touched the doorframe without thinking, a small superstition, and headed for the elevator. Out in the parking lot, the storm had moved east. The sky was a fading bruise, and the air smelled like clean metal. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The office would be there tomorrow, humming the right way. The printer would be loaded with paper no one apologized for using. The whiteboard would carry a new line worth circling. And somewhere in another building with another badge, a woman might be learning that control isn't the same as care. We went home. We slept. We came back and did it again. Not perfectly, not heroically, just better. And in the long run, that's the only revenge any workplace ever needs.